My name is Dallas. I am 67 years old, and I never thought the day would come when my only son would abandon me after heart bypass surgery. Standing in the hospital discharge area, my legs wobbly and my chest still burning with pain, I stared at my phone in disbelief. The doctor had warned me not to walk unassisted for at least 48 hours. Yet here I was, alone and desperate. Little did I know that who picked me up that day would change everything about my life and my understanding of what family truly means. Before I get into my story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe if you have ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted most. Trust me, what happened next will surprise you. I spent my entire career as a high school science teacher in a small town outside of Portland. Teaching chemistry to teenagers for 35 years gave me plenty of patience, which came in handy raising my son Thomas as a single dad after my wife Eleanor passed away from breast cancer when he was just 16. Those were difficult years, but we got through them together. I thought we had formed an unbreakable bond during that time, supporting each other through the darkest moments of grief. I coached his baseball games, helped him apply to colleges, and celebrated every milestone in his life with the pride only a father can understand. After retiring 8 years ago, I settled into a quiet life in the same 3-bedroom ranch house where Thomas grew up. I kept myself busy with a small vegetable garden, weekly poker nights with fellow retirees, and volunteering at the local Veterans Center. I served 2 years in Vietnam back in 1975. Nothing heroic, just communications support. But I always felt a responsibility to give back to my fellow veterans who weren't as fortunate as I was. Thomas grew up to become a successful investment banker in the city. He lived about 40 minutes away from me, which seemed like the perfect distance. Close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to give us both independence. For years, this arrangement worked wonderfully. Sunday dinners became our tradition, and I watched proudly as he built his career. I never wanted to be a burden on him, so I made sure to maintain my independence, handle my own affairs, and only call when it was important. Everything changed 5 years ago when Thomas married Allison. She came from a wealthy family and worked as a marketing executive for a luxury brand. She was beautiful, ambitious, and clearly used to a certain lifestyle. From our first meeting, I sensed a coolness from her toward me. Nothing I could point to specifically, just a feeling that she was evaluating me and finding me lacking. The Sunday dinners became less frequent after the wedding. First, they were shifted to once a month, then to special occasions only. When I would visit their new 5-bedroom house in the expensive part of town, Allison would make subtle comments about my clothes being outdated or my car being too old. She would tell stories about her own parents traveling around Europe or wintering in Florida, with sideways glances at me that made it clear she was comparing. I remember one Thanksgiving when I brought my homemade apple pie, a recipe that had been in our family for generations and that Thomas had always loved. Allison took one look at it and said, "Oh, how quaint. We actually ordered a gourmet dessert selection from that French patisserie downtown. But we can put yours out too. I guess some people might want a more rustic option." Thomas just stood there, saying nothing. That was when I first noticed the change in him, how he seemed to shrink in her presence. Last year, my health began to deteriorate. What started as shortness of breath during my morning walks turned into chest pains that would wake me in the night. My doctor ran tests and delivered the news I dreaded: 3 blocked arteries requiring bypass surgery. The prognosis was good, but the procedure was serious and would require significant recovery time. I put off telling Thomas for nearly 2 weeks, not wanting to worry him. When I finally called to share the news, he sounded distracted, asking if I could hold on multiple times to speak to someone in his office. When I told him about the needed surgery, his first response was, "Is this something your insurance will cover?" Not concern for my health or offers of help, but concern about money, despite knowing I had good teachers' retirement benefits. In the months leading up to the surgery, I asked for Thomas's help exactly 3 times. Once to drive me to a pre-surgical appointment when my car was in the shop, once to help move my bed downstairs as per doctor's recommendation for my recovery, and once to pick up a prescription when I had a bad case of bronchitis. Each time, The excuses came quickly. Work emergencies, prior commitments with Allison's family, house renovations that needed supervision. Each time, I ended up calling Martin, my neighbor of 20 years, who helped without hesitation despite his own arthritic knees. Martin and his wife Judy had watched the whole situation unfold over the years. One evening, as we sat on my back porch, Martin said what I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. "Dallas, that woman has turned your son against you, and he's too whipped to stand up to her." I defended Thomas, blaming his high-pressure job and the expensive lifestyle they had committed to with their new mortgage. But deep down, I knew Martin was right. I still remember my 67th birthday 3 months before my surgery. Thomas and Allison had promised to take me to dinner, only to cancel last minute because they got tickets to a concert. The text message came just an hour before they were supposed to pick me up. I had already showered, shaved, and put on my best shirt. I sat in my living room all dressed up with nowhere to go, feeling foolish and forgotten. Through all this, I kept telling myself not to be that clingy father-in-law who demands attention. I valued my independence and didn't want to be a burden. I had my routine, my friends, and my health, though that was now failing me. I told myself that Thomas had his own life to live, and it wasn't his fault that his wife came from a different world than mine. The neighbors saw it differently. Judy would bring me containers of soup and casseroles, saying, "Since your son is too busy to check on you, somebody has to make sure you're eating right before this surgery." My poker buddies would offer rides to appointments, with Frank, a retired postal worker, saying, "Dallas, you drove me to every chemo appointment when I had colon cancer. This is what friends do for each other." I found myself caught between pride and need. I didn't want to be pitied by my friends or seen as the abandoned old man whose son had better things to do. But as the surgery date approached, the reality set in that this wasn't a minor procedure. The doctors had made it clear that the recovery would be challenging. I would need help, at least in the first week or two. I wouldn't be able to drive, shouldn't climb stairs, and would have lifting restrictions. Deep down, despite everything, I still believed that when it really mattered, when his father was facing a life-threatening situation, Thomas would step up. I held on to that belief like a lifeline as the days counted down to my surgery. Blood tests, chest x-rays, meetings with anesthesiologists all reminded me of what was coming. Through it all, I kept thinking, when it counts, Thomas will be there. I just never imagined how wrong I could be. The day before my surgery arrived with a crisp fall chill in the air. The maple tree in my front yard had turned a brilliant red, and I found myself staring at it through the window, wondering if I would see it lose its leaves this year. Surgery always carries risks, especially at my age, and despite the doctor's confidence, I couldn't help but consider the possibility that these might be some of my last views of the world. I packed my small overnight bag methodically. Toiletries, a pair of loose pajamas, slippers, and the worn paperback Western novel I'd been saving for hospital time. The pre-op instructions said to remove all jewelry, so I took off my wedding band for the first time in 44 years and placed it in my bedside drawer. That simple act brought tears to my eyes as I remembered Eleanor and wished she was here to hold my hand. Around noon, I called Thomas at work. His secretary put me on hold for nearly 10 minutes before he finally picked up, his voice hurried. "Dad, I'm heading into a meeting." "What's up?" "I'm having the surgery tomorrow morning, son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to be at the hospital by 6 a.m. There was a pause, followed by a sigh. "Right, the surgery. Listen, we've got the Henderson account presentation tomorrow. It's been on the calendar for months. I can't reschedule it." I hadn't even asked him to drive me yet, but he was already making excuses. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Martin has offered to drive me. I just thought you should know." "That's great," he replied, sounding relieved. "Call me when you're out of recovery, okay? I might not be able to answer right away, but leave a message." "What about visiting during the weekend?" I asked, hating the hopeful note in my voice. "The doctor says I'll likely be there 3 to 4 days. Another pause. "This weekend is tough. We have Allison's college friend's wedding on Saturday, And Sunday we're meeting with the landscape designer for the backyard renovation. He lowered his voice. You know how Allison gets when I cancel on her plans. Of course, I said automatically. No problem. I'll have plenty of nurses to keep me company. Thanks for understanding, Dad. You always do. He ended the call quickly after that, promising to check in when he could. I sat at my kitchen table after hanging up, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. Martin arrived promptly the next morning at 5:30 a.m., his wife Judy accompanying him with a thermos of coffee and homemade banana bread for after the surgery. For when you can eat solids again, she said, patting my arm. You'll need your strength. The hospital admission process was a blur of paperwork, changed into a gown, inserted IVs, and repeated questions from different staff members. When the nurse asked who would be taking me home after discharge, I hesitated before mentioning Martin's name again. I saw her make a note in my chart about non-family member transportation. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took effect was the surgical nurse holding my hand and telling me everything would be fine. I wanted to believe her, but found myself wondering who would water my tomato plants if things didn't go as planned. I woke up in the recovery room, disoriented and in pain despite the medication. A nurse noticed my open eyes and came over immediately, explaining that the surgery had taken longer than expected due to a complication with one of the grafts. But Dr. Reynolds is very pleased with the outcome, she assured me. You did great. The next few days passed in a haze of pain medication, vital sign checks, and shuffling walks around the hospital floor with a nurse by my side. Each day grew a little easier, though the chest pain remained a constant companion. By the third day, I could manage a full corridor loop without stopping to rest. What I hadn't anticipated was how exhausting everything would be. Simply sitting up in bed to eat required effort. Showering with assistance left me needing a nap. The doctors explained that this was normal after major surgery, especially with the blood loss and anesthesia effects, but it still caught me off guard. I'd always been strong and independent, able to split my own firewood well into my 60s. This new weakness was humbling. Thomas called once, briefly, the evening after my surgery. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, with him asking generic questions about how I was feeling and promising to visit soon, though we both knew he wouldn't. He didn't call again during my hospital stay, though I noticed he had posted pictures on social media of Allison and himself at a rooftop bar downtown the night after my operation. By day 4, Dr. Reynolds came in for his morning rounds and announced I was ready for discharge. Your recovery is progressing nicely, he said, reviewing my chart. But I'm concerned about your home situation. You live alone, correct? I nodded, and he frowned. The first 48 hours at home are critical. You absolutely should not be alone during that time. You'll be on pain medication that can cause dizziness. You'll need help with meals and monitoring your incision site. Is there someone who can stay with you? A family member, perhaps? My son, I started, then stopped myself. I have friends who can check in on me. The doctor's frown deepened. Checking in isn't sufficient. You need someone there continuously, especially overnight. If you stand up too quickly and fall, you could tear your incisions or worse. A hospital social worker named Patricia was called in to discuss options. She sat beside my bed, clipboard in hand, going through possibilities. We could arrange home health care visits, though most insurance plans don't cover 24-hour care. There are short-term care facilities where you could stay for a week or so until you're more stable. I shook my head at each suggestion. The thought of going to some facility with strangers felt worse than being alone. My son will help, I lied. He just couldn't visit because of work, but he's planning to stay with me once I'm home. Patricia looked skeptical but made notes on her clipboard. All right, but I'm going to leave you information about our emergency response services. It's a button you can wear that will call for help if you fall or need assistance. Later that afternoon, Nurse Jenny came in to start my discharge paperwork. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with kind eyes and efficient movements. So, is your son coming to pick you up today? She asked casually as she checked my vital signs one last time. The question hit me harder than it should have. I hadn't actually confirmed with Thomas, had been avoiding making that call, fearing the response. "I need to let him know I'm being discharged," I said, reaching for my phone on the bedside table. Jenny nodded and continued her work, giving me privacy for the call. But Thomas didn't answer, of course. It was the middle of the workday. So instead, I sent him a text, trying to sound casual despite the anxiety building in my chest. "Just got discharged from the hospital. Doctor said I can't walk yet or be alone for 48 hours. Can you pick me up when you have time?" Then I waited, watching Jenny fill out forms and disconnect my IV, all the while checking my phone every few seconds. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Jenny finished her paperwork and told me she'd return with a wheelchair once my ride arrived. Finally, my phone buzzed. My heart leapt, then immediately sank as I read Thomas's response. "My wife said we can't keep dropping everything for you every time. Just call an Uber." I stared at the message, reading it over and over, unable to process that my own son would respond this way when I was at my most vulnerable. The casual cruelty of it, blaming his wife, suggesting a rideshare app for someone just days after open-heart surgery, as if I were simply inconveniencing him by needing help after a minor procedure. I wasn't sure what hurt worse, the surgical incision running down my chest, or the wound my son had just inflicted on my heart. I must have been staring at my phone for longer than I realized, because when I looked up, Jenny had returned to the room and was watching me with concern. "Everything okay, Mr. Cooper?" she asked, using my last name as she'd done throughout my stay. "Fine," I said automatically, though nothing was fine. Just waiting to hear back from my ride. I couldn't bring myself to try Thomas again. Instead, I texted back. "The doctor says I can't be alone for 48 hours after discharge. I need someone to stay with me. This isn't just about a ride home." I pressed send and waited, watching the message status change to read almost immediately. This time, the response came quickly. "We have an important client dinner tonight that's been planned for weeks. I can't just cancel it. Can't one of your veteran buddies help? Or hire a nurse? We'll try to stop by on the weekend." The weekend was 3 days away. I felt a surge of anger replacing the hurt, my hands shaking slightly as I typed back. "Thomas, this is serious. The doctor won't let me leave unless someone is with me. I just had my chest cut open." The next reply made my stomach drop. "Dad, you're being dramatic. Thousands of people have this surgery. Just take an Uber home and call that neighbor of yours to check on you. We've got our own lives too, you know. Allison says you're guilt-tripping me and it's not fair." I set the phone down, unable to look at it anymore. The final message felt like a slap. I was being dramatic about major heart surgery. I was guilt-tripping by asking for help when doctors said I needed it. And again, he was hiding behind Allison, using her as the excuse for his own failure to step up. Jenny returned to check on me, clipboard in hand. "Your ride should be here soon, right? I need to get this discharge paperwork finalized." I couldn't meet her eyes. Shame washed over me, hot and suffocating. What kind of father raises a son who abandons him after heart surgery? What kind of man has no one to call when he's in need? These thoughts raced through my mind as I struggled to find words. There's been a change of plans," I managed finally. "My son can't make it." Jenny looked confused. "Oh, is someone else coming instead? We really need to free up this room for incoming patients." No one else is coming," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll figure something out. Maybe call a taxi." Her professional demeanor shifted to concern. "Mr. Cooper, didn't Dr. Reynolds explain you need someone to stay with you? A taxi just solves the transportation, not the supervision you'll need at home." I nodded miserably. "I know, but my son, he can't help right now. He has other commitments." There must have been something in my voice, some crack in the facade I was trying to maintain, because Jenny's expression softened from concern to something like compassion mixed with indignation. "Let me see what I can do," she said, stepping out of the room with her phone in hand. Left alone, I couldn't help but think about all the times I had dropped everything for Thomas. The time I drove 4 hours in a blizzard to pick him up from college when he had appendicitis. staying in a cheap motel near campus for 3 nights until he could travel. The baseball championship I attended despite having walking pneumonia, because he begged me not to miss his big game. The countless school events, doctor appointments, and emergencies large and small where I had been there, no questions asked, because that's what fathers do. I remembered the night Eleanor died. Thomas was 16, angry at the world, convinced the doctors could have saved her if they'd tried harder. I held him while he sobbed, though I was breaking apart inside too. "It's you and me now, buddy," I had told him. "We'll always have each other's backs." Where was that boy now? When had he become this man who could text his father to take an Uber after heart surgery? Was it my fault? Had I failed him somehow, raised him to be selfish and cold? Or was it simply his wife's influence, the allure of a different lifestyle that made him ashamed of his middle-class upbringing and his aging father? These thoughts tormented me as I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, still wearing the standard issue gown, my packed bag beside me, with nowhere to go and no one to help me. For the first time since Eleanor died, I felt truly alone. Jenny returned about 20 minutes later, now dressed in street clothes instead of scrubs. Her shift had ended. "Mr. Cooper," she said with a small smile, "I think I've found a solution, if you're willing to trust me." At this point, "I don't have many options," I replied honestly. "My father is on his way here," she explained. "He's retired now, but he was a paramedic for 30 years. More importantly, he's the kindest man I know, and when I told him about your situation, he insisted on helping." I felt a complicated mix of gratitude and humiliation. I can't impose on strangers like that. "Dad would say you're not imposing if you're invited," Jenny countered. "Besides, he's a Vietnam vet too. He says there's a code among veterans. You never leave one of your own behind." Those words hit me hard. I hadn't mentioned my service to Jenny, so she must have seen it in my medical chart. The idea that a fellow veteran, a complete stranger, would step up when my own son wouldn't brought a lump to my throat. "I don't know what to say," I managed finally. "Say yes," Jenny suggested gently. "Let someone help you. My dad can drive you home and stay with you until we figure out a better solution." What choice did I have? I nodded, and Jenny smiled, helping me gather my things as we waited for her father to arrive. In the discharge waiting area, I checked my phone one last time. There was a new message from Thomas. "Don't try to make me feel guilty, Dad. You raised me to be independent, so you should understand that I have responsibilities. Allison and I will try to stop by Sunday afternoon to check on you." I turned off my phone without responding and put it in my pocket. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. Something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my son, and things would never be the same again. The discharge area was busy with people coming and going, nurses pushing wheelchairs with patients heading home, family members carrying flowers and overnight bags. I sat quietly in my wheelchair, feeling invisible among the joyful reunions happening around me. An elderly woman across from me was being fussed over by what appeared to be 3 generations of her family, all gathered to take her home. The contrast to my situation wasn't lost on me. Jenny had gone to the entrance to wait for her father, leaving me with my thoughts. I was still trying to process Thomas's rejection, the casual dismissal of my needs after major surgery. The pain medication was wearing off, and I could feel the throbbing ache in my chest intensifying, matching the emotional pain I was experiencing. "Mr. Cooper?" A deep voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore jeans, a flannel shirt, and a leather jacket with a Vietnam veteran patch on the sleeve. His eyes were the same kind shape as Jenny's, though his were a weathered blue to her brown. "I'm Samuel Williams, Jenny's dad," he said, extending a hand, then quickly withdrawing it when he noticed my IV bruises. "Sorry about that. Old habits. Jenny filled me in on your situation. Please, call me Dallas," I said, feeling awkward. "I really appreciate this, but I can't ask you to." Samuel waved away my protest. "You're not asking, I'm offering. One vet to another." He tapped the patch on his sleeve. "Jenny said you served too. Where were you stationed?" Communications unit near Saigon. 74 to 75. I replied. You, Army. 69th Infantry. 68 to 70. He said. Different times, same war. That's enough for me. He moved behind my wheelchair. Now, let's get you home, soldier. My truck is right outside. There was something so matter-of-fact about his manner, so free of pity or judgment, that I found myself relaxing slightly. This wasn't charity. It was one veteran helping another, that I could accept without shame. Jenny walked alongside us as Samuel wheeled me toward the exit. Dad's going to help you get settled at home and stay with you tonight, she explained. We can figure out tomorrow when it comes. I really can't thank you both enough, I said, emotion making my voice rough. Samuel chuckled. Save your thanks until you've tried my cooking. Jenny says I make the worst oatmeal in Oregon. His humor broke the tension, and for the first time that day, I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. Samuel's truck was a well-maintained older model Ford, lifted slightly higher than standard. I hesitated at the passenger door, uncertain if I could manage the climb up without tearing my stitches. Without a word, Samuel positioned himself beside me, providing steady support as I carefully maneuvered into the seat. The simple act of getting into a vehicle left me winded, a stark reminder of my current limitations. I've got some pillows in the back for you, he said, reaching behind the seat to grab a small cushion, which he placed between my chest and the seatbelt. This should make the ride a bit more comfortable. Chest incisions and seatbelts don't mix well. This thoughtful gesture, this understanding of my needs without explanation, brought home just how unprepared Thomas would have been to help me, even if he had been willing. As Jenny waved goodbye from the hospital entrance, promising to check on me tomorrow, Samuel started the engine. What's your address, Dallas? I gave him directions to my house, and we pulled away from the hospital. For a few minutes, we drove in comfortable silence. Then Samuel spoke. Jenny gave me the basics, but I want you to know I'm not looking for your life story, not unless you want to share it. Sometimes things happen with family. I've been there myself. Something in his tone told me he understood more than he was saying. I found myself opening up slightly. My son. He's changed since he got married. His wife comes from money, and I think I embarrass him now. Samuel nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. My daughter Lisa hasn't spoken to me in 15 years. Married a guy who convinced her I was too controlling, too old-fashioned. Last I heard, they were living in Phoenix with my grandkids, who probably don't even know I exist. The simple revelation that this stranger shared a similar wound made me feel less alone. How do you deal with that? I asked. One day at a time, he replied. Found family instead of blood family. My veteran support group, neighbors, church community. Jenny and her husband have been my rocks. He glanced at me briefly. It still hurts, but I've built a good life anyway. Sometimes the family you choose is more reliable than the one you're born with, or the one you raised. We fell silent again, the weight of shared understanding between us. As we drove through familiar neighborhoods toward my home, I realized I hadn't offered to pay for gas or compensate Samuel in any way. I should give you something for your time and trouble, I said as we pulled onto my street. This is far beyond a simple favor. Samuel shook his head firmly. Not happening. This isn't a transaction, Dallas. This is one human being helping another. If you want to pay it forward someday when you're back on your feet, that's payment enough. He pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. Home sweet home, he said, looking at my modest ranch house with its small front garden and aging paint job. Nice place. Looks lived in, comfortable. It's nothing fancy, I said, thinking of Thomas and Allison's sleek modern home, but it's paid off, and it's mine. That's what matters, Samuel agreed. Now, let's get you inside and comfortable. Then I'll need your keys to make a quick run. Can't stay with you if there's no food in the house, and I'm guessing your pantry wasn't stocked for guests. As Samuel helped me carefully out of the truck and up the walkway to my front door, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. The betrayal from Thomas still stung sharply, but alongside it was this unexpected connection with a stranger who was quickly becoming something more. It was as if in my darkest moment, when I felt most abandoned, life had sent me an unexpected lifeline. Inside, Samuel helped me settle into my recliner, adjusting pillows behind my back and making sure my pain medication and water were within reach. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had cared for others before, checking that I was truly comfortable before exploring the kitchen. As I suspected, he called out after examining my refrigerator and cabinets. "Bachelor basics and not much else. I'm going to call my wife Margaret to bring over some groceries, if that's okay with you." "You're already doing too much," I protested weakly, though the thought of having proper food was appealing. Hospital meals had left much to be desired. "Margaret would come anyway once I told her the situation," Samuel replied, already dialing. "She's been packing care bags for vets in need for 20 years. You'd just be giving her an excuse to do what she loves." As he spoke quietly to his wife, giving her my address and a shopping list, I closed my eyes briefly, exhaustion overtaking me. When I opened them again, Samuel was sitting in the armchair across from me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Margaret will be here in about an hour," he said. "In the meantime, is there anything you need? Any family members you want me to call?" The question was innocent, but it brought back the reality of Thomas's rejection. "No," I said quietly. "There's no one to call." Samuel nodded, accepting this without judgment. "Well, you've got me and Margaret now, and Jenny will stop by tomorrow after her shift. That's 3 someones right there." In that moment, surrounded by the kindness of strangers when my own blood had turned away, I felt something shift inside me. The bitterness I'd been nursing began to give way to gratitude. Perhaps this was not the end of something, but the beginning of something else entirely. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of medication schedules, short walks around my living room to prevent blood clots, and more genuine care than I had experienced in years. True to his word, Samuel stayed, setting up camp on my couch despite my offers to give him the spare bedroom. "Closer to you if you need anything in the night," he explained simply. His wife Margaret arrived that first evening with 3 bags of groceries and a homemade lasagna already prepared for dinner. She was a petite woman, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, quick movements, and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of the army nurses I'd met in Vietnam. "Samuel says you're one of ours," she said by way of greeting, already making herself at home in my kitchen. "Any dietary restrictions I should know about?" "Just the low-sodium diet the hospital recommended," I replied, somewhat overwhelmed by her efficient presence. "Already accounted for," she said, unpacking containers of food labeled with masking tape. "My brother had bypass 2 years ago. I know the drill." That first night, we ate dinner together in my living room, Samuel insisting on serving me since getting up was still a painful ordeal. The lasagna was delicious, made with ground turkey instead of beef to accommodate heart-healthy guidelines, and for the first time since before my surgery, I felt my appetite returning. While we ate, I kept expecting my phone to buzz with a message from Thomas, perhaps asking if I'd made it home, or checking to see if I'd found help, but the phone remained silent. At one point, I caught myself glancing at it, and Margaret noticed. "Expecting a call?" she asked gently. "No," I admitted. "Not really." Samuel and Margaret exchanged a look but didn't press. Instead, Samuel changed the subject, telling stories about his time as a paramedic that had me laughing despite the pain it caused my chest. Margaret rolled her eyes at his more outlandish tales, occasionally correcting details or adding context that made it clear this was a well-rehearsed dynamic between them. Their easy companionship after 40 years of marriage was both beautiful to witness and painful to observe, reminding me of what Eleanor and I might have had if cancer hadn't taken her too soon. By the second day, Jenny arrived as promised, checking my incision with professional care and pronouncing it healing nicely. She brought a small duffel bag. "I packed some clothes for Mom and Dad," she explained. "They're planning to tag team for the next few days, if that's okay with you." I was speechless at their generosity. "I can't keep imposing on your family like this," I protested. Jenny smiled. "Dad told me he's already given you the not an imposition if you're invited speech, so I won't repeat it. But he's right. Plus, mom's enjoying having someone new to fuss over. Their empty nest syndrome has been pretty bad since my brother moved to California last year. Throughout that day and the next, neighbors began stopping by, alerted to my return by the presence of Samuel's truck in my driveway. Martin and Judy arrived with a pot of chicken soup. Frank brought mail he'd been collecting from my box, and several others came with well wishes and offers of help. Each visitor was greeted warmly by Samuel and Margaret, who somehow managed to make everyone feel welcome in my home without overexerting me. During a quiet moment while Margaret was taking a nap in the guest room and Samuel was fixing a leaky faucet in my bathroom, a task I hadn't even mentioned needed doing, I checked my phone again. Still nothing from Thomas. On impulse, I opened social media and saw he had posted pictures from the client dinner he claimed couldn't be rescheduled. Everyone smiling with cocktails in hand at an upscale restaurant downtown. In the caption, he thanked Allison for organizing another perfect evening, with no mention of his father's surgery or homecoming. I must have made some sound, because Samuel appeared in the doorway, toolbox in hand. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said automatically, setting the phone down. "Just checking messages." Samuel gave me a knowing look but didn't pry. Instead, he said, "Margaret's been busy while you were napping. She posted in our veterans group about a fellow vet needing some support after heart surgery. Hope that's okay." "What kind of support?" I asked, suddenly concerned about becoming a charity case. "Nothing dramatic," Samuel assured me. "Just letting people know you're recovering and might appreciate visitors, meals, that kind of thing. Veterans take care of each other. It's what we do." True to his word, the next day brought visits from 3 veterans I'd never met, each bringing food, books, or simply time to share stories. One man, Jim, had undergone the same surgery 2 years prior and offered practical advice about recovery that the doctors had never mentioned. Another, Ricardo, promised to return to help with yard work once I was further along in my recovery. The third, Bill, simply sat quietly with me, sharing comfortable silence and occasionally commenting on the baseball game we had playing in the background. By the 4th day post-discharge, something remarkable had happened. My refrigerator was full of labeled containers of heart-healthy meals. My coffee table held a stack of books and magazines dropped off by well-wishers. A schedule had appeared on my kitchen wall, with different names assigned to different days for check-ins and visits, and not once had I felt pitied or like a burden. Margaret, taking a brief break from organizing my medication into labeled pillboxes, sat down across from me with a cup of tea. "How are you feeling today, Dallas? And I don't mean your incision." I considered her question carefully. Surprised, I answered honestly. "A week ago I thought I only had Thomas to rely on, and now you have an army," she finished for me. "That's how community works. Samuel and I have been on both sides of this equation many times. Someday, when you're back on your feet, you'll do the same for someone else." Later that evening, Margaret showed me a post she'd made on social media. It featured a photo of Samuel and 2 other veterans who had visited, all giving thumbs up around my living room with my permission. She'd been careful to note. The caption read, "This is what it means to be a veteran. When one of our own needed help after heart surgery and had no family support, our community stepped up. No veteran left behind, during service or after." The post had gone viral within the local veterans community, with hundreds of supportive comments and offers of additional help. A local news reporter had even reached out, asking if they could feature the story on their Everyday Heroes segment. "You don't have to do the interview if you're not comfortable," Margaret assured me. But Samuel and I thought it might inspire others to check on the veterans in their community. I was torn between my private nature and the potential good that could come from sharing what had happened. "Let me think about it," I said finally, as I went to bed that night, carefully positioning pillows to support my healing chest. I realized that my phone had remained silent for 5 days now. No calls or texts from Thomas, despite his promise to visit that weekend. The pain of his abandonment was still there, but it had been overshadowed by the unexpected blessing of new friendships and community support. For the first time, I fell asleep without checking my phone one last time, without hoping for a message that wouldn't come. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of coffee and quiet conversation in my kitchen. Samuel and Margaret were discussing something in low voices, occasionally laughing softly. The normality of it, the simple comfort of having people in my home who cared, brought tears to my eyes. I wiped them away before carefully making my way to the kitchen. "There he is," Samuel said cheerfully. Margaret made her famous whole-grain pancakes, heart-healthy version. Doctor-approved and actually edible. Unlike my cooking, Margaret swatted his arm playfully. "Don't listen to him. His chili won the Veterans Hall cook-off 3 years running, only because all the judges had lost their taste buds in the war," Samuel countered with a wink. Their easy banter, the morning light streaming through my kitchen window, the stack of pancakes waiting at my usual place at the table. It all combined to create a sense of belonging I hadn't felt since Eleanor was alive. In that moment, I realized I was healing from more than just heart surgery. I was healing from years of loneliness I hadn't even fully acknowledged to myself. As we ate breakfast, Margaret mentioned casually, "That post I made has really taken off. The local VFW wants to organize a rotation of veterans to help with your recovery, and 3 different church groups have reached out to add you to their meal delivery programs." "That's overwhelming," I said, truly stunned by the outpouring of support. "You can say no to any of it," Samuel assured me, "but I think it shows how many people are just waiting for a chance to help, if only someone points them in the right direction." Later that day, as Samuel helped me with my physical therapy exercises recommended by the hospital, my doorbell rang. Margaret went to answer it, and I heard her surprised voice in the entryway. A moment later, she appeared in the living room doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Dallas, you have visitors. A young couple who say they're family." My heart jumped painfully in my chest. Thomas had finally come. Samuel helped me straighten up in my recliner and handed me a button-up shirt to cover my undershirt and visible bandages. As I fumbled with the buttons, my hands suddenly unsteady. He leaned down and whispered, "We can ask them to leave if you're not up for this. Your house, your rules." I shook my head. "No, I need to see him." "Them." Samuel nodded and stepped back just as Thomas and Allison entered the living room, both looking as if they'd stepped out of a catalog in their casual yet clearly expensive weekend wear. Thomas carried a small gift bag, while Allison held a bouquet of flowers that still had the upscale florist's tag attached. Their confident expressions faltered as they took in the scene before them. Their aging father being cared for by strangers, medication organized neatly on the side table, a walker positioned nearby for my short exercise routes around the house, and most importantly, the veteran's cap Samuel had placed on the bookshelf alongside photos he'd found of my military service days. "Dad," Thomas said, his voice uncertain. "What's going on? Who are these people?" Before I could answer, Margaret stepped forward smoothly. "I'm Margaret Williams, and this is my husband Samuel. We're friends of Dallas, and you must be Thomas. Dallas has told us about you." The carefully neutral way she said this made it clear she knew exactly who Thomas was and what he had done, or rather, failed to do. Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We came as soon as we could," he said, though we both knew this wasn't true. "There was a misunderstanding about when you were being discharged." Allison stepped forward, thrusting the flowers toward Margaret rather than me. "These are for your father," she said to Thomas, not even looking at me directly. "I hope he's feeling better." Margaret accepted the flowers with a tight smile. "I'll put these in water. Dallas, do you want me to bring some coffee for everyone?" I nodded, grateful for her steady presence. Thomas approached my chair, awkwardly patting my shoulder. "You're looking good, Dad. Surgery went well?" "As well as major heart surgery can go," I replied evenly. "The doctors are pleased with my progress." An uncomfortable silence fell. Samuel, sensing the tension, excused himself to help Margaret in the kitchen, giving us privacy while still remaining within earshot. I appreciated his tact. Once they left, Thomas lowered his voice. "Dad, who are these people really? How did they end up in your house? You don't even know them." The incredulity in his voice sparked something in me, a calm certainty I hadn't expected to feel. I know them better after 5 days than you've allowed me to know your wife in 5 years, I said quietly. And they're here because when I needed someone, they showed up. It's as simple as that. Thomas's face flushed. That's not fair. We have responsibilities, commitments. I can't just drop everything at a moment's notice. My career is at a critical point right now. More critical than your father's heart surgery? I asked, still keeping my voice calm, free from the anger I had expected to feel. More important than making sure I could get home safely from the hospital. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Thomas insisted. Allison and I both have demanding careers. We can't just rearrange our entire lives because you need a ride. It wasn't just about a ride, I corrected him. The doctors wouldn't discharge me unless someone was staying with me for at least 48 hours. I tried to explain that in my texts. Allison, who had been examining the photos on my mantel with barely concealed disdain, turned at this. Thomas told me, you were just being dramatic. Lots of people have heart surgery and manage just fine. Her dismissive tone finally brought Samuel back into the room, a protective energy radiating from him despite his casual posture. Actually, ma'am, as a former paramedic, I can tell you that the first 48 hours after discharge from bypass surgery are critical. The risk of complications is significant. Dallas could have suffered a serious setback, or even died without proper supervision. Allison looked startled to be contradicted. Thomas quickly jumped in. We didn't realize it was that serious, the way Dad described it. I told you exactly what the doctor said, I interrupted, finally allowing some of my hurt to show. You chose not to hear it. Margaret returned with a tray of coffee cups, her timing impeccable. Cream and sugar on the side, she announced cheerfully, though her eyes were watchful, as we awkwardly arranged ourselves for this unexpected coffee gathering. Thomas's gaze kept returning to Samuel's veteran cap and the photos of my military service that had been prominently displayed. I didn't know you were spending time with the veteran community, he said finally. You never talked about that part of your life much. There's a lot we haven't talked about in recent years, I acknowledged. But Samuel and I share an understanding that doesn't need many words. Allison set down her untouched coffee cup. So how did you meet these friends? The slight pause before the word friends carried volumes of implication. Samuel answered before I could. My daughter Jenny was Dallas's nurse. When she learned he had no ride home and no one to stay with him, she called me. One veteran to another. It was an easy decision to help. And then the local veterans community rallied around him, Margaret added, pulling out her phone. My post about Dallas's situation has been shared over 1,000 times. The local news is doing a feature on it next week. She held out her phone, showing the viral post with its hundreds of supportive comments. Thomas took it hesitantly, scrolling through with increasing discomfort. Allison leaned over to look, her face paling slightly. You posted about our family business online? Thomas asked, his voice tight. No one mentioned you, Margaret replied calmly, taking her phone back. The story was about veterans supporting each other when family isn't available. No names were used except Dallas's. But people will know, Allison said, her voice rising slightly. People in our circle follow local news. They'll connect the dots. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? And there it was. Not concern for my health or well-being, but worry about appearances, about how they would be perceived by their social circle. The naked self-interest in her statement hung in the air between us. I think how you look is the least important concern right now, Samuel said, his voice gentle but firm. Dallas is recovering well, thanks to the community that stepped up. That's what matters. Thomas looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between his wife's evident distress and the undeniable reality of what they had done, or failed to do. Dad, he began. Obviously there was a miscommunication. We would have helped if we'd understood the severity. Would you? I asked simply. Because your text was very clear. We can't keep dropping everything for you every time. Those were your exact words. That was about the timing, Thomas protested weakly. And honestly, Dad, you have asked for a lot of help lately. I let that statement sink in. I asked you for help exactly 3 times in the months before my surgery. I kept track, Thomas. 3 times. And each time, you had an excuse. Allison stood abruptly, This is ridiculous. We came to check on you, not to be attacked. Thomas works 60-hour weeks to provide for our family, to build the life we want. He can't be at your beck and call just because you're lonely. Her words hit like a physical blow, but before I could respond, Margaret stepped in, her voice steel beneath silk. Dallas isn't lonely anymore. He has a whole community now. People who show up not because of obligation, but because they understand what it means to care for each other. Thomas looked between Allison and me, clearly torn. Dad, we do care. We're just busy building our future. Surely you understand that. I understand priorities, I said quietly, and I've accepted that I'm not one of yours. That's okay. It hurt at first, but now I see it clearly. Is this about money? Allison asked suddenly. Is that what this is about? Because Thomas told me you were planning to leave everything to him in your will. But if you're changing that because of one misunderstanding. Samuel made a small noise of disbelief, quickly covered by a cough. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Actually, I did update my will while in the hospital, I said truthfully. But not because of any misunderstanding. Because of clarity. I've decided to leave most of my estate to the Veterans Support Foundation. I've seen firsthand now how much good they do. Thomas's face went pale. Dad, that's our inheritance. The house, your savings, everything Mom wanted us to have. Your mother wanted you to be a good man, Thomas. Money was never her concern, I replied, and the house was paid for with my teacher's salary and my military benefits. I've earned the right to decide where it goes. You can't do this, Allison sputtered, her composure finally cracking. We've been counting on that money for our future, for our renovation plans. Thomas deserves it after everything he's done for you. Her naked greed was almost refreshing in its honesty. For the first time, I saw clearly what my son had married. Not just wealth and status, but a fundamentally self-centered worldview that had gradually infected him too. I think it might be best if you leave now, Samuel suggested gently but firmly. Dallas needs his rest, and this conversation isn't conducive to recovery. You don't get to tell us when to leave my father's house, Thomas snapped, finally showing real emotion. Dad, you can't be serious about changing your will, and you can't let these strangers turn you against your own family. They're not turning me against anyone, I said wearily. They simply showed me what family actually means. It's about showing up. It's about caring more about someone else's needs than your own convenience. Allison grabbed her purse. This is insane. Thomas, we're leaving. Let your father play the victim with his new friends. See if they stick around when there's no inheritance to chase. That accusation finally brought me to my feet, despite the pain in my chest. Samuel moved quickly to my side, supporting my elbow, but I waved him off gently. I needed to stand on my own for this. No one here knows about my finances, Allison. No one asked, and no one cared. They helped me because I needed help. That's a concept you might want to reflect on. Thomas looked torn between his wife and me, the conflict visible on his face. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of the boy I had raised, the son who once had compassion and empathy. But then Allison tugged his arm, and his expression hardened. This isn't over, Dad, he said, his tone half threat, half plea. You're not thinking clearly after your surgery. We'll talk again when you're more rational. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I replied, and my door is always open to you, Thomas, but on different terms than before. They left without further goodbyes, Allison storming ahead while Thomas followed, his shoulders slumped. I heard their car start and drive away, the sound fading into the quiet afternoon. I sank back into my recliner, suddenly exhausted. Samuel and Margaret exchanged glances but said nothing, giving me space to process what had just happened. Finally, Margaret brought me a fresh cup of tea and sat beside me. Are you all right? She asked simply. You know, I said, surprising myself. I really am. For the first time in years, I feel like I can see clearly. There's sadness, yes, but also relief. Samuel nodded in understanding. Sometimes the hardest chains to break are the ones we forge ourselves through expectation. As I sipped my tea, I realized he was right. I had been holding on to an idea of family that no longer existed, if it ever truly had. Now I was free to build something new, something based on genuine care rather than obligation. It wasn't the future I had imagined, but maybe, just maybe, it could be better than what I had lost. 6 months passed more quickly than I could have imagined. Winter gave way to spring, and my health improved steadily with each passing week. The incision down my chest faded from angry red to a pale line, a permanent reminder of both the surgery that saved my life and the events that changed it. My recovery followed a predictable medical pattern: gradual increases in activity, regular checkups, and a new regimen of medications that became part of my daily routine. What was less predictable was how my life reorganized itself around the people who had stepped into it when I needed them most. Samuel and Margaret became fixtures in my weekly schedule. What began as medical necessity evolved into Thursday night dinners at their house, where I was welcomed into their extended family of grown children, grandchildren, and a rotating cast of friends from the veterans community. Their dining table could always accommodate one more. Their conversations always had room for my voice, and their home felt increasingly like a second home to me. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars Post, inspired by my story, launched a new program called Veterans Helping Veterans, which coordinated support for former service members facing health crises. I found myself drawn into their planning meetings, first as the inspiration for the program, then increasingly as an active participant. By month 4 of my recovery, I was volunteering 3 afternoons a week, making phone calls to check on other veterans, and helping coordinate transportation to medical appointments. Thomas made 3 attempts to contact me in those 6 months. The first came just a week after our confrontation, a text message that read simply, "We should talk about the will when you're feeling better." I didn't respond. The second was a voicemail on my birthday, his voice stiff and formal as he wished me well and suggested we clear the air. The third was an unexpected visit one Sunday afternoon, where he arrived alone, without Allison, bearing a store-bought cake and awkward conversation. During that visit, I maintained the boundaries I had promised myself I would set. I was polite but distant, accepting his surface-level apologies without allowing him to pretend nothing had happened. When he finally worked his way around to discussing the inheritance again, I was prepared. "The will is finalized, Thomas," I told him calmly. "The house and 80% of my savings will go to the Veteran Support Foundation. I've left you 20% and your mother's jewelry, which was always meant for your future wife." His face fell, the real purpose of his reconciliation attempt exposed. "Dad, that's not fair. I'm your only child. Being my child gave you my love and support for your entire life," I replied. "It doesn't entitle you to my assets after I'm gone. Those go where I believe they'll do the most good." He left shortly after, his carefully constructed facade of reconciliation crumbling in the face of financial reality. I watched him drive away with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. The son I had raised was still in there somewhere, but he had made his choices, and now I had made mine. In truth, the changed will was only partly about the money itself. It was about breaking the transactional relationship that had developed, where my worth to my son seemed measured by what he might eventually inherit. By removing that future reward, I clarified the terms. Any relationship we rebuilt would need to be based on genuine care, not financial expectation. The Veterans Foundation I supported grew beyond my expectations. What began as a simple pledge of my estate transformed as I became more involved in their work. I found myself helping to establish a specific fund for veterans needing transportation to medical appointments, inspired by my own experience. The foundation director, a retired Army colonel named James, welcomed my input and treated my teacher's perspective as valuable, something I hadn't experienced in years. Most surprisingly, I found myself becoming a volunteer driver for the very service I had helped create. 3 days a week, I drove my old but reliable car to pick up veterans who needed rides to the VA hospital or other medical facilities. Some were older than me, Vietnam or even Korea-era veterans, while others were young men and women who had served in Iraq or Afghanistan. Each had a story, each had served, and in driving them, I found a purpose I had been missing since retirement. Samuel often joked that I had become the Uber driver from heaven for local vets, a playful reference to Thomas's callous suggestion months earlier. What had been meant as a dismissal had transformed into a calling, a way to ensure no veteran in our community would face what I had faced in that hospital discharge area. My home changed too. The spare bedroom that had sat mostly empty for years became a regular guest room for Samuel and Margaret's visiting grandchildren, who had adopted me as a surrogate grandfather. The walls that had held only fading family photos now displayed new memories. A group picture from the Veterans Day parade, where I had marched with Samuel, despite still needing a cane. Snapshots from a fishing trip with Ricardo and Bill. The newspaper article about our veterans' transportation program that featured a photo of me beside my car. On weekends, my kitchen often filled with the sounds of Margaret teaching her granddaughters to bake, using my oven because hers was too small for their ambitious projects. Samuel and I would escape to the backyard, ostensibly to give them space but really to enjoy quiet conversation over coffee, watching the birds at the feeder I had installed at his suggestion. The physical healing of my heart had been straightforward, following the predictable path that medical science had mapped out. The healing of my spirit had been less linear, but ultimately more profound. The crisis that I had feared would leave me vulnerable and alone had instead revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed, and connections I never expected to make. One evening, nearly 6 months to the day after my surgery, I sat on my back porch with Samuel, enjoying the lengthening spring twilight. We had fallen into a comfortable silence, the kind only possible between people who feel no need to fill every moment with words. "You know," Samuel said finally, "when Jenny called me about you that day, I never imagined we'd end up here. Here encompassed so much. Our friendship, the veterans program, the intertwining of our families, the healing that had taken place. Neither did I admitted. I was so focused on what I was losing that I couldn't see what I might find." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "That's how it often works. We grip so tightly to what we think we need that our hands aren't open to receive what we actually deserve." His words resonated deeply with me. I had clung to the idea of Thomas as my family, my support, my legacy, refusing to see how that relationship had changed. In letting go of those expectations, I had opened myself to new connections, new purpose, new joy. "I've been thinking about something Eleanor used to say," I told Samuel. "She always believed that crisis shows you who people really are, not who they pretend to be, but who they are at their core." "Smart woman," Samuel replied. "She was right." "She was," I agreed. This heart surgery revealed the truth about everyone in my life, including me. "And what truth did it reveal about you?" Samuel asked curiously. I considered his question carefully. That I'm stronger than I thought, that I still have value to offer, that I've been settling for less than I deserve in relationships. I paused, looking out at the garden that Ricardo had helped me plant. And that family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when it matters most. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deepening shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow, I would drive 2 veterans to their appointments at the VA. The day after, I had a meeting with the foundation about expanding our transportation program to neighboring counties. The weekend would bring one of Margaret's family dinners, the kind that stretched late into the evening with stories and laughter. My life had been unmade and remade in ways I never could have anticipated when I sent that desperate text message from the hospital 6 months ago. The rejection that had felt like an ending had actually been the beginning of something far better than what I had lost. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about the viewers watching this story, perhaps facing their own moments of rejection or reinvention. If I could leave them with any wisdom from my journey, it would be this. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed creates space for what you truly deserve. The family that matters isn't always the one you're born into, or even the one you create, but the one that forms around you when you're at your most vulnerable. I hope my story helps you recognize the true family in your own life. The people who show up without being asked, who stay when it's difficult, who value you for exactly who you are. If you've found those people, treasure them. If you haven't yet, keep your heart open to unexpected connections. They may appear when you least expect them, but need them most. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of unexpected healing and connection. Share it with someone who might need to be reminded that rejection is often redirection to something better. Leave a comment about a time someone unexpected stepped up for you when you needed it most. Or tell us about how you became the unexpected helper in someone else's story of need. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, the greatest gifts often come disguised as our greatest disappointments. It just depends on how we choose to unwrap them.